Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast and newsletter all about how generative AI is changing the media, journalism, and the news. I'm Pete Paschal. I'm joined by fellow tech journalist John Biggs, and every week, John and I talk about the latest news in AI that matters most to journalists and other folks in the media. After the news briefing, I go deep on how AI is changing newsrooms in The Conversation, where I talk to fellow journalists, media executives, and innovators helping build the AI-driven newsrooms of the future. This week, I spoke to Thomas Seymat, an editorial project manager at Euronews. Thomas also teaches at the Journalist Training Center in France, one of the oldest journalism schools in the world, where he has begun integrating generative AI into the curriculum. I'm excited to get to that, but first, let's talk news with John. Hey, John.
Howdy.
How you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's been a wild week, I think, with this the executive order and a couple other things popping up.
Yeah, that was a crazy thing.
What was the latest news? It was that the 1% are going to control all of AI, and we're going to be. Did you see this?
Is that the news? Is that what people are saying? That's basically the take, right? So the big thing was that they were supposed to come out with the executive order Monday. Mm-hmm. They actually took a little while. They came out with a fact sheet first, and that's all anyone was sort of working for the first 24 hours or so. And then the takes started coming out after the actual order. Well, the takes started coming out right away, but then the executive order came out, and then sort of the more thoughtful takes came in. And I felt like people were kind of impressed with how comprehensive it was, but everybody had sort of wildly different takes on how this was going to shake out. So the 1% thing I hadn't seen, is that mostly like
this was I got to find this for us. Why don't you talk about what the executive order was first, and then we'll talk about this 1% idea.
Yeah, so it's a wide-ranging order that goes over like a lot of different things, everything from the security of these AI systems to privacy of the people using them rather, and job protections. So it goes over like the big picture stuff around AI. And the takes I've seen, they're impressed with how comprehensive it was, the details it went to, the deadlines it set. So it actually names specific government agencies. It names specific things they're going to do. Now, the first bullet point is all about security, as you might think, because there's been so much panic, real, justified or not, about how the damage AI systems could do, even short of like general intelligence, which everyone sort of acknowledges is probably not immediate, but a concern. But anyway, security is a big deal. And they talk in the language about like red teams and getting these commercial systems or big systems and people developing them who are developing systems over a certain threshold, that they need to essentially tell the government what they're doing if they're above a certain threshold, right? Which, it sounds very a little bit big brothery, but it is also like, I think that's generally a good idea, probably. Like, okay, just let us know if you're doing this stuff, and then let us know what sort of security and safety you're doing around it. So while that's not directly related to the media, it is sort of the biggest takeaway from this whole order.
Well, I think the way we need to think about this is that this will be the background radiation of the internet now. We're gonna have these tools. They're gonna be around. And they're going to be generally available. We just won't know when they're being used, I think is the way to think about it. Like, we don't know if like the AI, if we're talking to somebody in Delta or something like that, is it a chatbot? Well, we know right now it's a chatbot because it's like stilted and it asks for like A and B or whatever to answer the questions. But I would
argue it gets flummoxed when you go off script.
Yeah, and eventually we're going to be in a situation where it's not going to go off script. It's going to be as smart as anything we were expecting it to be. So I think that's really where all this is leading.
Yeah, well, what you're touching on there is one thing that's covered in the order as well, which is disclosure or provenance, so to speak. And is this content AI generated or not? Which on the surface seems like a good idea, and certainly is a big thing in journalism and newsrooms. Who, if any newsrooms and media sites that are starting to rely on AI generated content, most of them have some kind of policy on disclosure, right? The problem begins, well, it
I
doesn't
mean
begin, but yeah,
how long does that policy last? It's like having a policy on using Word. Uh, we're gonna
exactly.
where we
Exactly.
use word processors in our day-to-day jobs, and we will let you know when we do it, and then eventually we're just like, I don't, nobody cares.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's even now, I think it's a really hard thing to figure out the subtleties of, because most, I would argue, what's sort of be happening now isn't like entire articles being written by AI. There's just sort of bits assisted, little things here and there that might either inspire the idea, fill in gaps, do the social shares or the SEO headline. I mean, just as a practical matter, you can't
Mm-hmm.
disclose an AI contributed to this in every one of those cases. And then if you start putting an AI contributed to this article at the bottom of everything, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Did it contribute 90% of it or 5% of it? So yeah, like this, that sort of voluntary honor system disclosure, while well-meaning, I think is going to rapidly become meaningless. However, this order touches on the technical side of that, which is to say metadata, ways of labeling AI, watermarking is part of this, that will be traceable as it sort of goes through the information ecosystem. So you can sort of trace it back. Oh, an AI created that. Seems like a decent idea. Again, though, I think ultimately it's on the honor system, because as they've shown already, it's pretty easy to break these systems, that you can insert some characters or whatever at some point along the
Well, I mean,
process.
look,
And then,
that's fun right now. That's like
yeah.
that's a party trick, but 99% of the time we're not going to be. There's going to be no way to break these things, and
Or
it's
people just won't bother,
yeah.
you know?
There's no benefit. There's no benefit to like shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to this kind of stuff, which is problematic if you think about it. You're basically moving into a world where these things are so vital that we won't even let anybody break them. And we're also going to be in a situation where there's an entire newsroom that's just one person saying, "You robot do this, you robot do this." Oh, we got everything done. Cool. So we're done for the day. It's like it's a very, very weird world that we're moving into. But I think to
It's a dream world for that one guy.
yeah, it's
Not
a
so
dream world
great
for
for
that one
everyone
guy.
else.
Yeah. How do you get that that guy's job, right? The story that I
Totally.
was talking about was was what's his name here? Jan LeCun. He's
Hmm.
basically like the godfather of AI, and he's pointing out that a lot of this talk about like, oh, we have to make regulations, and we have to work together to make sure that AI is not too smart, all that other stuff. That's basically just one percenters trying to lock down AI. Now, the
Hmm.
same thing happened in terms of the internet. There was situations where, well, we have to be in control of this. This can't be like a governmental thing. We only the I don't know, Yahoo has to be the primary arbiters of good taste when it comes to how search is done, and that's completely self-serving, and that's absolute garbage. And that's exactly what's going to happen if we're not careful. If we allow the doomsday scenarios to like play themselves out in our heads, we're going to be in a situation where the politicians, quote unquote, are going to give all the power to people they think are the smartest, and those people are going to treat it just like the internet. They're going to use the control that they have, the power that they have over the over AI to basically break our situations.
Yeah. So that totally, I think, rules of thumb can help here. So regulation just in general, it's going to favor the incumbents. Now, AI is, this part of AI is relatively new, and there's sort of rapid innovation. I think every 5 minutes I see 5 new startups on my LinkedIn feed who are debuting tools. And when I heard a good take on the this day in AI podcast, I think it's called, a couple of
Mm-hmm.
guys in Australia who are very well informed on all this stuff, and they mentioned it feels like the day after the internet debuted, and we're suddenly worried that someone might create a website that has harmful content on it, and that we need to regulate it immediately. So that kind of feels like what the ethos of this order is. It's like it's really about that sort of general intelligence that we're looking at in these bigger picture scenarios. And yes, it name checks some things like building bioweapons and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But and again, credit to the folks at the White House who seem to have done a pretty comprehensive job on this. But is it going to stymie innovation in some level that, like you say, favors the biggest players, and it at a time when the technology it's really just out of the starting gate,
Yeah, but like arguing that somebody's going to use AI to generate bioweapons is the exact same thing as saying that somebody's going to use the internet to produce a nuclear bomb. You could do it.
Yeah.
Going to be tough, and it might take a few minutes, and you're going to also have to get a background in biotechnology, which is not the easiest thing to do. It's not like plugging in an Arduino board and maybe something cool will happen. This is some serious work. So it's all these arguments are straw men to a degree.
Yeah, and what I find, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize here, that a lot of the so-called harmful things that people are doing with AI right now, I mean, they could already do them. It would have just taken them a little longer. Putting, bad photos together. Yeah, an AI could do it, or you could spend 15 minutes or a half hour in Photoshop to do it. Maybe slightly less great job, but it's not like those tools aren't available now, or you couldn't do things like that today. So yeah, like I think it's important not to overreact on a lot of the safety stuff. And I would say, I think the order, from what I've seen anyway, generally doesn't quite do that. But again, the whole ethos of it, I think, to your point, is probably going to end up favoring the big players. And that may not necessarily be a good thing at this point, especially because the deadlines on this thing are pretty tight. Some of them are like within 120 days or whatever.
Yeah, but it's like the idea that regulation is going to fix this is sort of a pipe dream, but it's also nice to know that somebody's actually thinking about it in the halls of power, quote unquote. What are we doing with what's this labeling won't solve AI's problems? I just took a look at this here.
Yeah, we've already kind of touched on that a little bit. So it stems from the executive order, and it's like labeling where AI contributed to things. Is that really going to tell you anything? And it's like, particularly like for whether it's images, whether it's code. Like who isn't using like a Copilot right now to code stuff, right? Like a good chunk, like massive significant parts of coding now are basically done by AI and not even verified by humans. Images is it's easy enough to disclose that an AI generated an image. Or what if an AI inspired the image? Like, is that even a meaningful label? And again, to your point, who cares at some point? At some point, AI is just one of the many tools we use. Like if you're in Photoshop and you took the photo and you use Adobe's new tool to tell Photoshop to remove something or fix it, do you have to disclose that AI did that when you could have done that yourself with slightly less intelligent tools 2 months ago? Which are, like, is the magic brush that knows the edges of a person in a photo, is that AI? Like, I'm not actually marking the outline, like, did AI contribute to that?
Yeah. Well, 100%.
Where's the line here?
That's exactly the problem. Like we're not going to admit that we used Microsoft Word to write this document. And I remember distinctly, there was a journalism teacher who wanted us all to use film cameras. This was 2000 basically. And he says, you got to learn how to use film cameras. You got to learn how to use the dark room, all this other stuff. And I basically said, look, man, I got a Canon ELPH. I could shoot faster with it. I can get stuff done faster. I can print it out, whatever needs to be done. And this is 2000. I wasn't, no great shakes. This wasn't a great camera. But his view at that point in time was, it's kind of cheating to use a digital camera because, quote unquote, the quality wasn't there, quote unquote, the value wasn't there, etc. So,
which we're rapidly negated as points, because I remember those same points. I used to work at Sound and Vision magazine right around that time, and I worked there for 5 years. And it was funny to hear people defend film tape camera, like the videotape, versus solid state memory, because solid state memory started to come out towards the end of my time there, around 2004, 2005. And I was, talking about new products in the magazine and saying, hey, you could use this camcorder, just access stuff. And they say, no, we should be recommending the tape camera because that's better quality. And I was just like, tape, and I just said it, tape is doomed for obsolescence. And if you can't see that, I don't know what planet you're living on. And obviously within a few years, all of that became true. Not even, probably even less time than that.
So anyway, our arguments are kind of specious, because we're basically saying that like this technology that captures reality is superior to another technology that captures reality in a different way. This AI captures reality in a very, very special and weird way that's kind of dangerous to a degree, but it's also going to be ubiquitous. So we are in a different world, but you can have the AI draw a picture of George Washington here, or you can draw the picture of George Washington yourself, and both are going to be sufficiently George Washington-y for the purpose, I think.
Yeah, it's just in the AI's case, because how they work is kind of a black box. I think there's a bit of an ethical question here for people who use it, and probably why they want to disclose. And I certainly believe in the spirit of that, because it's like, well, I don't know where it got this from or how it made these decisions, but it did respond to the prompt in a way I expected, is kind of what that disclosure is meaning. And this is, again, I think this transitions nicely to the last thing I just say about the executive order, because it has some stuff in there about privacy, and not just as of people using AI, but also of like the data that's ingested by these systems. And certainly if you're ingesting, close to the entire internet, which it seems like stuff like OpenAI is doing, some private information is going to get hoovered up into that. And then how do you, as a person using that model to produce content, know that the stuff it's producing for you isn't necessarily tapping into private data? You don't really. I mean, how would you know? So I think there's a bit of an ethical question here. Maybe there's a bit of like transparency that could come out with these models. I'm not sure how it shakes out, but at least, again, like you say, they're thinking about these things, and maybe some more protections will come out of that.
Yep. All right. And last, we have Apple actually mentioning AI. I mean, we know that they're kind of doing some sort of generative stuff in the background, but the new machines are supposed to be aimed at AI processing, really.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what sort of products Apple's going to come out with in terms of consumer-facing AI features. I mean, I don't know if they're ever going to say AI in that context. Now, they've mentioned AI with respect to these new M3 Macs for obvious reasons. It's kind of a buzzword. They want to appeal to developers and people creating things and selling this machine to them, which totally makes sense. But Apple, it's been doing AI in its own way this whole time, whether they call it machine learning or whatever. I don't know. It's such an Apple thing to sort of completely eschew the terminology of the greater tech world, and they're just going to say, we're going to do our own thing. But I don't know how much longer can they keep kind of ignoring this at a consumer level. I guess, they're not ready to unveil the AI enhanced Siri, and maybe that's coming next year sometime. But it definitely, the perception is they're late to the party. But
I mean, look, nobody's really late to the party. It's not like you're not buying a Lenovo laptop that's targeted to AI. So I think that's a little bit disingenuous. Nobody knows how to market this stuff is the real answer.
I mean, you're talking about the hardware or just AI services?
Yeah, services, hardware, anything. Microsoft did Bard, but Microsoft already has a search engine that people were using to a degree. So We're kind of in that position too. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bing thing, yeah, that was interesting. I'd be interested to see if anyone has actually started using Bing just because of the chat. I'm not sure what the latest stats are there on that.
I can't imagine it's happening, but I mean, if it's a way to access, and there's a lot of this happening right now. There's people who are asking around, like, how do I access this? And just like, oh, we'll just go to Bing and just type something in. And I mean, that's how a lot of people are going to start using this stuff, and a lot of people are afraid to use this stuff too, which we're discovering when we're doing this class. It's basically just like they look at it as, again, making their own guillotine, especially if you're a marketer, especially if you're a journalist, especially if you're in advertising, all that other good stuff.
Yeah. Well, what choice do you have but to either stick your neck in the guillotine or wait for the forest being incinerated behind you to catch up?
Yeah, that we're
Tough
mixing
choice.
Metaphors, but yeah, it's like Bambi versus Marie Antoinette.
I guess the revolutionaries, I should have said, they're coming up from behind you. You mentioned the class. Why don't we talk a little bit more about that class?
Yeah, so we're doing a class together, Pete and I. It's basically AI for journalists, AI for marketers. So the goal is to have about a 3-hour class. We're going to go through how all this stuff works, how you should think about it, and then we're going to do a lot of hands-on work on how to use it. I've done this class before for a few people, and they really enjoyed it. The mission is to explain it simply and easily. There's really not a lot to be confused about. It's just the only thing you could be like afraid of is that, I don't know, somebody calls you out because you used it briefly. That's one of the things as a freelance writer. I'm actually I use it to outline a lot. And to be called out for that is, again, it's like being called out for not using a typewriter. The tool is there, the tool works, and why can't we use the tool? And again, I understand that there are people who are afraid of that. So that being said, let's work around the damage. Let's work around that damage and figure out the best ways to use this stuff, aside from just like saying, ChatGPT, write me a 2,000 word essay on the monkfish or something like that, and hope it works. And it definitely won't work, which is what we've discovered.
Totally. What I'm hearing is that we're going to dispel the fear and give you very pragmatic.
We're the anti-fudsters.
Exactly. Cool. Yeah. And it's not a huge commitment. It's like a 3-hour class. So did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so. We'll put the link in the bio and the whatchamacallit here, the description.
The notes in the show notes.
Yeah, the show notes.
Check the show notes for the link. You can also email me at pete@petepaschal.com if you'd like, and I can give you all the details on that.
All right. So now we have your guest.
That's right. Let's go right into my conversation with Thomas Seymat. So I'm really pleased to welcome to the Media Copilot this week, Thomas Seymat. Thomas is the Editorial Projects and Development Manager for Euronews. His role also involves teaching sometimes at the Journalist Training Center in France, which is one of the oldest journalism schools in Europe. And he's actually just finished his first seminar on teaching generative AI to the students there. I'm excited to talk to him about that, how he's using generative AI, and the whole idea of shaping the next generation of journalists around this technology, which they are about to enter an industry that is about to get disrupted by it. So all of that I'm excited to talk about. So Thomas, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, thanks for being here. So let me just start off. I'm curious, just you and your experience and how you're using generative AI, if at all, in your work. How are you dealing with the technology just in sort of your real world life and job right now?
I think I started playing with Mini DALL-E a few years back. When it hit the scene, I obviously saw a lot of news coverage about the technology, and often in very innovative formats as well. And I think I have started paying for ChatGPT for the last 6 months. So I'm a heavy user, I guess you would say.
Nice.
I use it on my personal time. I use it also for work. Maybe don't tell my boss that.
Well, how do you use it for work? Don't worry, we'll put this one behind the paywall. Maybe
summarizing. It's useful. I mean, obviously, I'm not a native English speaker. It's useful to, polish something you've written, reformulate, summarize texts, and I'm not in a content producing role, so none of
Gotcha.
what I publish, no, not of what I write, is published to the general public.
You publish to an email.
Yes.
That's what you do.
But no, it's been very interesting to see the evolution. And lately, with the rollout of DALL-E 3, I played with it with my 5-year-old daughter this weekend,
Oh, nice.
and just generating.
Does she just give you ideas and you plug them into the
yeah.
interface? That's
One
nice.
of her first idea was a pterodactyl, the dinosaur,
Sure, yeah.
flying in space to find
Technically
new
not a
friends.
dinosaur, but go ahead.
Exactly, a flying lizard,
Yeah.
flying in space to find new friends, and she was pretty
Aw.
wow with the output.
That's awesome. So just again a little bit more like when ChatGPT sort of first arrived on the scene last fall, what did you think? A lot of people sort of seem to see that as a moment where they just it dawned on them that this was going to change everything. Did you have a similar feeling? Did you see it coming since you had already sort of been a little bit immersed in AI and the technology, or what was your feeling when it came out?
I wasn't expecting the chat part of the GPT, the interface, to be so catchy, sticky, right? You want to keep asking questions and refining what you say and to see the output. Very, very much impressed with the quality of the most recent model. I pay for it, which is a big sign that I really
obviously get some value out of it.
Yeah, and the fact that it's such a powerful tool, not just for journalists, but for everybody who's doing text things, is has lots of potential. And you see the value that the user find it, and the numbers of users growing. It's incredible.
So is Euronews doing anything with Gen AI in any sort of tangible way? Are they basically just kind of looking at it right now? Obviously, tell me what you can. I know you might not need to plead the fifth on this, I realize, but
yeah, we are not using it in our output.
right.
Sure, some people like myself are using it in their respective role. We do use AI as a help for translation. We are a multilingual media company, so it's plugged in our workflow, but I wouldn't qualify it as a generative AI.
Right. So you're basically using more established traditional technology. That's obviously translation's been a thing for a while. Various new tools like the stuff from 11 Labs and whatever else are making that a little more democratized, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But you haven't gone whole hog into that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Cool. So tell me about this class. So you did a seminar at this prestigious journalism school in Europe, and I'm really fascinated by that in terms of shaping the next generation of journalists. It's like I said in the intro, getting them ready to enter an industry that is in the process of being disrupted or just about to be disrupted. See, everyone seems to think it will be. By this new technology. So how do you frame that? How do you get them to think about it? Particularly, there is obviously young people, right? They're probably already using it in some way on whatever they're doing, either personally or in their schoolwork. So how do you how do you teach a class on this? Tell me how it went.
Well, it was very interesting. It was pretty hard actually to finalize the curriculum, because every time I would refresh LinkedIn or Twitter or all the newsletters I would get, I would have to add something else, something new was coming up. But once I got into the classroom, I realized a few of them had used especially Midjourney, because they were more familiar with the Discord aspect of things, right? And they were not necessarily aware that it had been becoming a paid service now. But some of them had used the visual generative AI, and not so much ChatGPT. And in general, I try to make my course both accessible, meaning we had to define, what's a NLP, what's a LLM, but as well giving them the opportunity to try and discuss, how they prompted, the limitation they found, etc.
So, how much time did you spend on the pragmatic side of it? Like, here's the tools, here's the things you can use it for, here's, prompting and how to refine that, versus sort of, I'm hesitant to say sort of existential parts, but like sort of big picture concerns or even little picture concerns, right? Like in terms of ethics, accuracy, obviously a huge deal in
Mhm.
anything
Mhm.
using via Gen AI.
Yeah.
Um, so what was sort of the balance there of the what you could do versus what you should do?
Yeah, I think I tried to enmeshed the two side to give it a fair balance, I would say. Maybe not exactly 50-50, but that both I would bring up, copyright issues, responsibility, who's accountable, right, for the pictures, and the students as well were pretty critical, not negative, but they got pretty fast that okay, can I publish this picture that I just did? Who does it belong
Mhm.
to? And I was like, okay, well, maybe talk to your legal department in the media that you are, working for. And yeah, they were pretty smart about it. And I was giving them a general idea of the tension and limitation and opportunities that the technology provide using, real world examples and the journalism AI / LSE survey that was published a few weeks ago.
Oh, tell me about that
Yeah.
for listeners who might not be familiar.
Yeah. So journalism AI is a London School of Economics initiative looking at AI in the news, and they've been working on it for the past, I would say, 4 years. So before the hype, before the generative AI.
Right, before everyone could get
Yeah,
a ChatGPT account and start doing this. There was
exactly.
definitely stuff going on.
Yes,
Most, yeah,
and they were very much focused on working with media initially in the Western world, and they expanded to the global South as well. And the interesting part is they conducted a survey in 2019 and one more recently. And I used this report as a resource to give pretty much what's the most up-to-date global overview on how newsroom use AI and generative AI. And I think I might have been a little bit biased because it is a French school of journalism, but I wanted to give them, the international aspect.
sure.
And on the question of, whether the newsrooms use it for news gathering, news production, news distribution, that was interesting because they could see. But when I got into the details about, who leads AI initiatives and who's responsible, like, nitty gritty office, not office politics, but office structure and workflow, they were a little less engaged, I could feel. But
Hmm.
it's normal. They graduate students. They're not in newsroom yet, and they might not realize that, who gets to say is also important, right, on those innovative projects.
Do you find overall? I guess what was your temperature take of the kids in the sense of like, I guess they're not kids. I mean they're adults, but I mean like the students. Um, is there more of a general enthusiasm about this, and that because they're getting conversant in it, they will be more prepared? Or I might even the flip side of that might be, why should I bother? Like going into
Mm-hmm.
journalism at this point because it's like robots are going to take over, which is a dumb perspective, but I do feel like that cloud is sort of
Yep.
over everything when you start talking about this tech and applying it in those sort of three areas that you mentioned. What was the sort of general sense from the students? I guess it's
Yep.
more of a like an optimistic versus pessimistic vision there.
So those are students who are the very first few weeks of a 2-year long graduate program. So they still have a little bit of time before they actually join the job market.
Hmm.
But I really try to make them understand that A, as things stands, this is not going to steal your job. And B, if you're prepared and if you are decent at prompt engineering, this is going to become a skill that's going to be useful no matter how you no matter how things evolve, right? The
Hmm.
concept of generative AI and prompt engineering will be useful. And this is part of why I structured my course around some exercise where they would try, then we would discuss, And there was a few road to Damascus moments where people who had been very skeptical, that's weird, were like, okay, I am very impressed with the results that I gave. Obviously, I told them to double and triple check everything. But
Was that? Can you give an example of like a road
sure,
to
yeah.
Damascus moment?
Well, one of the students asked very specific questions regarding gender balance in a African country, Guinea-Conakry, which
Okay.
is I think on the west coast of Africa, and regarding the elected officials and the gender balance over the past 50 years, and what could we do to improve that balance. And apparently the results from ChatGPT 4 was no, it was Bard actually. We used Bard. Was very
Well,
structured, sourced, and with data and very interesting solutions, going further than what she had imagined. So yeah, most definitely a convert on this end.
so it was the kind of response that if a journal, I mean, not that she wasn't a journalist, but like the idea if this was being done for work, it would give you, it's almost like the story idea phase of
Yeah,
like, oh, here's some stuff and I could pursue. I thought of 1 through 3, but 4 through 6, actually I didn't. And now I have even more angles to pursue
yeah,
on this particular story.
exactly. And a lot of them, I told them initially, it's the training, the data trained on it stops in September 2021, or it's not very up to
Right.
date. A lot of them either didn't listen or try to go beyond this, and they were asking, okay, what did I miss as news stories for this specific local area over the past weekend? And they got it.
Right.
They like a almost like a morning newsletter of summarizing the news, right? Very pragmatic use in their daily life that uh, I was asking them to find ideas that would save time for them, and they went straight for the news summary with some good results. I was surprised at the quality of the results. Obviously, again, they need to check, but they seemed happy with that use case, right? Seeing the immediate
Mhm.
benefit of it.
Any areas of concern, any areas of, there's obviously always the danger of hallucinations on actual, well, even if it isn't content you're going to go and publish, it still might sort of send you on a wild goose chase on something or other. Let's talk about that a little bit on what their sort of attitude was to the hallucinations and any other sort of general areas of concern.
Hmm, hmm. Right after lunch, I had prepared like a lighter exercise with DALI through the Bing image creator, the free version of DALI.
Sure.
And some of them got it. Some of them tried to replicate people who exist, and they've quickly found that it's a limitation. They listed some people that wanted to have like lunch with the Queen, with the Freddie Mercury and Lewis
Hmm.
Hamilton and that sort of thing, and it was only good up to a specific point. Like Freddie Mercury and Queen Elizabeth II was there. They were there, but not the rest. The rest wasn't good. Another
Hmm.
one wanted to have Django Reinhardt, the jazz musician, playing the violin in Tunis, in Tunisia, and she was from there. She did not recognize the location of the picture, and Django Reinhardt was just general idea of the musician, not picture perfect portrayal of him.
Yeah, I find these image generators, even DALI 3, to just kind of be so off sometimes that, like, I have no doubt they're going to get better at just sort of listening. Like, again, the visual capabilities of them, no question, they're great. But it's like just in terms of like figuring out what I want is definitely they're further out than the generative text.
Hmm, hmm.
Generative text seems like it's much closer to sort of a more refined,
Yeah.
usable result. Whereas the image stuff is like, okay, maybe it's sort of in the neighborhood, maybe it isn't. Um, but okay, well, that's interesting.
There was
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
there
go
was
ahead.
definitely two approach from the students. There were about 18 of them, and I'll say half of them try to replicate like photojournalistic pictures, demonstration and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
The other one went to the route of illustration or very dreamy-like picture, and on the illustration, like almost kid books style or very dreamlike pictures. DALL-E was a much better, because you can't see the issues with a cartoon or kid's book compared to
Right.
something that tried to replicate a demonstration. You'll see every detail that feels wrong.
Well, that sort of touches a little bit on the ethics of generative AI. So, like, going for something that's really photorealistic means, you're going to probably have to clarify, if it's not obvious, that this is a Gen AI image.
Yep.
And this, I was talking with Harry McCracken about this a couple of weeks ago, where he, like, even if it is clearly fake or like a synthetic image, if you're doing it in the style of a particular illustrator, how ethical is that if you're not sure if they've given permission for that? And then there's sort of an even broader issue of, if you start to rely on these DALL-E or Midjourney created images as part of your output, what does this do to the industry of stock imagery? And are you cheapening the whole exercise of image creation, which of course is a whole industry in itself, right? Like, there's a whole economy there. I don't presume you have all the answers to this, or anyone does, but it's just stuff you have to sort of think through. Do you feel like that? I think first, how do you talk to the kids about that? Kids, I keep calling them kids; they're not kids. The students about that, and just how do you sort of perceive that shaking out in terms of broader ethics of generative AI imagery?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. For them to seize this question and make it their own, I asked them at the end to imagine and draft AI guidelines for the media that they are apprentices, right? So they spend half the time in school, half the time in the newsroom. And I was like, okay, you are employees of this media. What if tomorrow you're asked to do the AI guidelines for this media? And so that way they can talk about the tools, and the generative pictures is part of it. Obviously, I provided them with a lot of examples from French and international media. And I'm looking forward to read those assignments. I haven't yet received a lot.
Oh man, I was just going to ask, like, where did they sort of land? I'd be really curious if they sort of all landed more or less in the same place, or if it was wildly divergent.
Yeah, I don't know yet, but what I can tell is that even though they don't necessarily have experience in a professional newsroom, where there's standards teams, legal teams, ethics teams, they were very keen to, realize that this is new, but we should be careful. And also that something I insisted at the very introduction of my course is, this comes at a moment where the media in general is faced with several compounding crises, trust, news avoidance, the cost of living issues that makes media revenue even more fragile than it is. And so we really have to be careful as educators, journalists, and future journalists regarding those ethical questions, because you don't want to break the few left threads of trust from the audience with convenient but fake pictures that you publish because you can't find the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned sort of the three areas earlier of news gathering, news production, and news distribution, all of those with the potential to be enhanced or changed by generative AI. Just based on your sort of work with it and where the interest is, particularly from the students, I mean, where do you think the disruption is going to be the greatest, the quickest? Like, which of those three do you think is going to change the most in the shortest period of time?
I think the on both ends, both the news gathering part, we talked about it briefly, but catch me up with what's going on this very specific topic in a very dedicated local area, or suggest me some questions that I might not have thought about, or suggest me a list of diverse sources that I might not have in my Rolodex. And then on the other end, news distribution, I mean, it's already in place or will be in place soon in CMSs. Generate 3 kinds of headline that I can A/B test. Help me make this a better SEO lead, and structure stuff. That's all we know as journalists. We know we have to do it, right? We have to test and learn and A/B test and SEO and blah blah blah. Not every media has a dedicated SEO team or those resources to do that A/B testing and build this feedback loop into the newsroom. So once those features are built in, mainstream CMSs, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, because it's going to make the life of journalists a lot easier.
Yeah, I feel like you're dead on the sort of certainly the second part of taking some of that. I guess I would characterize it as sort of content marketing parts of it's arguable whether that's production or distribution, but like that part of the process, and automating them for a lot of newsrooms. What I think people sort of this might be correct, it might be not, is that like the it's not so much replacing people, because as you said, a lot of the newsrooms that are going to incorporate that weren't going to hire people for those roles anyway. They were too small and too under-resourced. And so this sort of gives them a little bit more of ability to have parity. That said, a human doing it, I feel like, is almost always going to still be better. So does that necessarily mean bigger newsrooms will replace those people with AI? I doubt it. Not in the short term, maybe in the long term, but I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out. You know what I mean? Like I have written sort of about this, not really in depth, but it's no secret that social media traffic is plummeting to news sites for various reasons, which makes sort of the whole idea of distribution through social media a little bit cheapened, right? So maybe that's a whole different thing. But it really kind of depends where your audience is. So in other words, it's kind of a nuanced thing. It's not just, all social media managers are going to be replaced with AI. I don't think that's true. But I do think the tech will enable many smaller newsrooms to compete there for what little traffic is left. I guess that's a sort of a theory I'm positing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, we're kind of at peak hype here in the AI world, right? It feels like honestly, ever since it feels like everyone came back from vacation after Labor Day, and everyone just decided like we're going to go, hit the gas on every possible AI release and technology, and it's just the pace of it the last couple of months has been insane. This can't continue. You know what I mean? Like like in terms of the pace of feature releases, the competition, and just the hype around it. What's your sense of like, is this going to hit basically a bottom falling out of the market? Like do you think there's a limited window for AI to sort of change some of those 3 areas we just talked about, and then if it doesn't actually make meaningful change, it's just going to sort of not fade away, but it'll start get regarded that the promise of AI it's not delivering on it? What's your perspective there?
So if I can be a bit of a veteran for a little bit, I was very much involved with immersive journalism and 360 video and a bit of VR a while back. When there was a peak as well and a very steep fall from grace. And you mentioned a little bit, but what I can foresee at least is a consolidation of the market. All the new startups offering services. And if you sell services to newsrooms, I don't know if you're going to make a good business anyway, but
they got no money.
Yeah, they won't as good as your product is. There won't be like 5 of you. There can only be a couple, right? And the big players, the big CMSs, the big softwares are already implementing generative AI inside their product and softwares. So I think eventually there will be a productive use for generative AI in newsrooms. There will be for sure regulations around it. And I don't say that just because I'm European and we have the European Commission, which is very keen to regulate tech, but it's going to happen. I think the public is going to demand it as well at some point. There's a few things where I'm a little bit less bullish about. Generative video, as of right now, I haven't been really impressed. And some other things where, in the contrary, I see a lot of use. Again, I'm biased because I work for a multinational, multilingual broadcasters and media, but the live translation possibility, the live, audio, text to audio to video with the lip syncing automatically on videos. That's very scary, but I think if it reaches a point of technical maturity with no bugs and no error, we will see a lot more translated content from media from everywhere, which I think is a good thing because I'd love to be able to read, or listen to German TV in English or French. I don't speak German, but if they have the system that works and I can follow what they're saying and doing, that'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. All the translation stuff, whether it's text, video, audio, it kind of boggles my mind on, I'm glad I don't have to figure out the distribution side of that, because it's a little like, okay, so is it the same RSS feed or whatever? Like, I mean, like that, like, I don't, that's more of a product thing to figure out, but I don't envy the people figuring that out. That said, everybody wants more eyeballs and more ears, and I don't know what the video term is. Anyway, more audience. I think that's a very sort of short-term thing, because we've all sort of seen that works. And I know what you mean in terms of your skepticism of whether or not generative video works, because just sort of turning content into a video, I think, is a very dicey exercise. But if you've already got a video and you've invested a little bit even into sort of the editing, I think the chopping up of it and translating of it into every possible channel and potential audience is a thing that I think is very eminently figure outable. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Cool. So any thoughts on just sort of the models themselves? Like, we have, you have commercial models like OpenAI, you have open source models, you got whatever, you can go and create, get for yourself on Hugging Face. And like, as media companies sort of start to think about these things and what they should sort of go with, how do you see sort of the decision-making process there potentially on, like, well, what should I use? How should I think about, like, just approaching the technology itself and what to use?
I think what's going to make a big difference is the ease of use, right? Kind of like the very first 360 cameras were GoPro glued together with, dedicated software to stitch all the pictures. Then you got the more modern cameras where you just press a button and everything happens. Or in a way, and I know you know more about this than I do, but crypto, some of it is easy, some of it is a lot more difficult, and maybe that plays a role in adoption by businesses, right? And I don't know enough, I would say, regarding different models. But the consumer-facing interface is going to be key for who's going to be the remaining 2 or 3. And I know some media are looking to devise their own fine-tuned model.
Right.
I would be interested to be in the room where they discuss the ROI of this happening. It makes sense for Bloomberg in a way, but it could be like a very interesting thing happening on the European level. But what's the end goal, really?
Yeah, I was at a recent panel where they talked about sort of a future vision of, and I guess there was sort of a more optimistic take on chat, not quite chat interfaces, but sort of interactive interfaces becoming a thing in the future as AI gets more integrated into the whole media ecosystem. So I guess that's where maybe we could go next in terms of like project out a few years where AI is just starting to get woven into things. How do you think the what is the information ecosystem like in like 5 years, and as a both a producer of news, a reporter, and also a reader, like then something is produced for you, whatever that is, and then you have AI enhancements. We're seeing the beginnings of this in apps like Artifact that are summarizing articles and speaking them to you. What's that on steroids? Like how do you think that's going to shake out?
Yeah, I was speaking to a good friend of mine, Mattia Peretti, who's very keen to explore the AI world as well, and he was mentioning this idea of like it's knowledge versus language, and right now generative AI is very good with language because of this probabilistic approach to text and based on billions of examples. But I think we're going to see a fast evolution on the knowledge part as well, and the gathering and structuring and sourcing of actual correct data points that are not, oh, those words should be next to each other according to such algorithm, so this is what I'm going to give my audience. But actual, replicating the human mind in a way that, oh, they want data on unemployment in the US compared to Europe. I know where to find the data. I know where to find the data in Europe. Let me draft something that is actually up to date, factual, error free. And as a content creator, as a journalist, um, you will need to be able to harness this power. Otherwise, either the people owning the model are going to do it for you, and then you're going to get with zero traffic, or you're going to be left in the dust, I think.
And bringing it back to, so I guess, your students, like that whole idea that is the world they're going to enter, like in a couple of years when they're done their programs. I imagine that's a bit of the message in terms of being conversant in all these things.
Yep.
How do you, prep them for that world?
I think the objectives of the course were to get them up to speed, and then give them some keys to stay up to date as well. Like the last few moments of the course were dedicated to, okay, who to follow, what panel to listen to, podcasts, etc., to equip them more so than I can do in 8 hours of class. But that the last message should be keep your eyes open, stay connected, keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And because this is going to have a big impact, and maybe in 2 years when you enter the job market, prompt engineering will be like the number one skill in demand, among everything else that you need to learn in school already. But it will be absolutely key.
Yeah, it seems like even more so than the social media era, even more so than when the internet first came out, you could be like a journalism student and not worry so much about the tools, right? You're learning the craft. You're learning, okay, here's what a beat is. Here's how to talk about it in a authoritative way. Here's how I do a nut graph, and basics like headlines and stuff like that, telling and storytelling. And now it feels like, and you could kind of like, the tools will be the tools when I get there, and whatever company I end up working for will show me their CMS and have social media policies, and you'll sort of figure it out. And now it seems like, well, now you have to integrate that. Like, not that it wasn't integrated before, like I remember, when I went to journalism school, there was certainly like the internet was new, right? And it was like, oh, okay, now there's online journalism, which of course is just journalism now. And in the same way, AI journalism, AI assisted anyway, journalism will be what online journalism was then, right? It's just going to be part of the air we breathe, and you like got to get conversant in it now as you're learning journalism, or you're just going to be left behind.
Exactly. And I think it's an important lesson to learn in journalism school as well, is that you will work in an evolving environment your whole life. So you need to learn your whole life, and that learning it's almost like a new language, right? Difficult concepts. You don't need to do a PhD in math, but it will also help you be on the same level, or at least be conversant with products team, tech team, etc., etc. And if you're bound to, like I am, work on innovative projects, you need to be able to, be kind of like the Rosetta Stone to translate concepts coming from outside into editorial ideas.
Cool. We've been talking about the message we want to give to the next generation of journalists and students. Let's flip that telescope for the final question. What is the thing you would say to people already in the industry about AI, and particularly with regard to this next generation coming in? How can they make sure what the media world, the next generation of journalists inherit, will be something productive and conducive to building both good journalism and good careers for those journalists? What should the media industry, people in the media industry, think about with respect to generative AI right now to make sure that happens?
Don't be afraid. And if you're going to do it in a transparent way that serves your audience. Because eventually you are only as relevant as you are to your audience. And whether it's with generative AI or not, you're still working for people who read, watch, or listen to you.
Awesome. Thomas, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation.
I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Folks, you've been listening to The Media Copilot. Please subscribe at mediacopilot.substack.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at The Media Copilot. Thomas, where can people find you on the internets?
I am at TSEYMAT on X and the Blue Sky now. And or you can add me on LinkedIn as well. Thomas Seymat, SEYMAT.
I've really got to change my notes to change Twitter to X. Even though it's still Twitter, the URL still says Twitter.
It is Twitter. It will forever be Twitter until it disappears.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been great chatting. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you in the future.